"What is this, my lord?" said the wizard. "The houses of the dead are no places for the living. And why do men fight here in the Hallows when there's war enough before the gate? Or has our enemy come even to Rath Dinnan?"
Welcome to the Wayward Wizards radio program. Today we are reading Book 5, Chapter 7, The Pyre of Denethor. My name is Zach.
My name is Logan.
So I called you today and said that as I was reading this, I was just reminded that Tolkien started out by writing this as a children's book. And this is just about as far away from a children's book as you can get. I mean, this is just some of the darkest subject matter you can possibly get.
It's very far away from How Long Expected Party and the toys made by the dwarves.
So before we even start talking about this chapter, Logan and I both wanted to say that we are going to be having really frank conversations about suicide in this discussion. And if that is something that you are struggling with, just know that there is hope. And we hope that you will reach out and talk to somebody. And if you are in immediate danger, you can always call 988 to talk to somebody who can help.
Yeah, we want you to take care of yourself. That includes, skipping this chapter if you need to, but it also includes reaching out for help. That's the thing to do. And so we're going to get into this chapter, but just know that we care about you and we want you to take care of yourself.
This chapter sees Denethor fall into madness and all the different responses that different characters have to him doing what's probably the worst thing that you can do to another person, which is murder-suicide of your own child.
Yeah, it's up there. He's been in a bad way. And I mean, the descent really started in the last time we saw him.
Yeah.
We find out later in the chapter that it's really in response to going and looking at the Palantir.
Yeah.
That's where Pippin kind of notices this like total change. I don't think it's uncommon for the weight of the world, responsibilities and relationships to like get to somebody.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that our judgment of Denethor it has to be kind of couched in some empathy.
Yeah, I think empathy is a really great word to describe. I mean, Tolkien's perspective on Denethor is very complex. And I think it's important to note too, this is a character who's grieving the death of his son.
Yeah.
And is someone who's under an incredible amount of stress. And he breaks under that pressure, and partly because of the story that he tells himself about what hope he has.
Yeah. And the story he's being told, right?
Yeah.
That's a major piece of this chapter, that he's being fed a narrative by Sauron.
Not showed anything untrue, but also not having the proper perspective on what he's able to achieve.
And Gandalf even says that the will of Sauron has entered the Citadel. And so there's something about, even though it's not untrue, there's something about letting somebody else's will, especially somebody as, maleficent as Sauron, like constantly be influencing you, that leads you to a place of like ultimate ruin.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's definitely his story. And I think the grief over Boromir, who's, clearly his favorite son, is so palpable. But of course we have it juxtaposed with Theoden, right? And his sort of final sacrifice. And so I do think it paints a pretty stark picture. Theoden enters his sacrificial moment as a king leading an army, but he's like stepping up to his responsibility to those men. And Denethor is shirking his responsibility to his people and also willing to sacrifice them. He's like, you should all burn. It should all burn. I don't know. His failure to like truly be in his role or whatever, live into his role, is part of what I think Tolkien's kind of gesturing toward.
I don't think I was really keyed into it until the most recent read of this book. This isn't the only mention of suicide in the book. We had uh, Sam considering whether or not to kill himself when he finds Frodo's body, and he's in that moment of grief. It says that he considers his options, and one of the options was casting himself into the ravine, and the other option was killing himself with a sword.
Yeah.
It's very subtle, but it's there. And Sam ultimately chooses not to do that. Denethor, of course, chooses to take his own life. But Gandalf tells him before he makes that choice, he says, basically, it's not, you don't have the authority to make the choice of when you'll die. Authority isn't given to you to choose the hour and the manner of your death.
Mm-hmm.
But in Tolkien, the kings of Gondor are given authority to choose the hour of their death. When Aragorn becomes king, he rules for many years, but then eventually he chooses that it's time for him to die, and he lays down and he says farewell to his family, and then he dies.
Yeah.
And that's a different manner of kind of choosing the hour of your death, because it's someone who's like fulfilled their duty. Denethor is like a mirror of that, a dark mirror of that. He's abdicated his responsibilities. He's choosing not only to die, but also to take his son with him on the way out to ease his own passing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just some incredibly dark stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's blessedly short, this chapter. I'm glad that we don't have to like really dwell on this exactly. I don't know. It definitely is somber, kind of wedged in between, these chapters about great battles and, heroic acts. Is this very somber toned chapter? Should we go back to the gate?
So last we saw Gandalf, he is facing down the Witch King of Angmar. He's the last man standing. And the Witch King of Angmar is standing there with his flaming sword, saying that it's his hour. And the cock crows and the horn blows and the Rohirrim come. It says, when the dark shadow at the gate withdrew, Gandalf still sat motionless. But Pippin rose to his feet as if a great weight had been lifted from him, and he stood listening to the horns, and it seemed to him that they would break his heart with joy.
I love this detail here too. And never in after years could he hear a horn blown in the distance without tears starting in his eyes.
Yeah.
That was such an impactful moment that he, kind of for the rest of his life, he hears a horn and remembers that moment. And Gandalf is just about to, follow the Witch King when Pippin remembers his task, his errand.
Yeah, Gandalf. And Gandalf rears around and says, "What are you doing here? Is it not the law of the city that those who wear the black and silver must stay at the citadel unless their lord gives them leave?" And Pippin's like, "Oh, he has." But he says, "He sent me away. The Lord is out of his mind, I think. I'm afraid he will kill himself and kill Faramir too. Can't you do something?" Question mark. And it's such a juxtaposition of Mary's question last chapter, wondering like, couldn't Gandalf have prevented this? Couldn't Gandalf
Yeah.
have done something? Pippin is similarly helpless and in need of help. And it's Pippin's errand that pulls him away from Mary's hope for how Gandalf could have intervened. And it is like, it's pretty explicitly said, all the evil that was done is because Gandalf was pulled away from like his true errand by the madness of Denethor.
Yeah, which I guess is, tactically Sauron, you know, extending his will into the city is something that interrupts Gandalf's ability to do good on the field.
Like the designs of the enemy are to turn the attentions of the good to war against themselves instead of, and that's how Sauron works, making the elves and the dwarves mistrust each other,
Yeah.
creating discord amongst the allies and friends. That's how Sauron works.
Yeah. That's literally how the ring works, right? I mean, we haven't talked about this, I don't think, in regard to the ring, but one of the big things about the ring is that everybody argues over it all the time because it's this like great power that people want to, twist to their own ends or whatever. But I never thought of it as a real manifestation of who Sauron is as a character and the way that he operates.
Yeah. But Gandalf, he's saying like, I really need to be out there. Like, I'm the strongest person here. I need to be fighting this great evil power, the Witch King of Angmar. And he has to make a choice. Does he go out and try to make change in the battle, which would ultimately lead, potentially to Theoden living? But, could Gandalf have defeated the Witch King? Maybe, probably not.
I think the only answer you can give is possibly. I really don't think you can say for sure that he could.
It's definitely an example of, this is like a calamitous choice that Gandalf has to make. He's like, all right, do I, leave this person, this evil to, run amok in this battle? Or do I go and prevent one person from dying? He's like, if I prevent one person from dying, that means that certainly, many more people will die. So it's just, it's a terrible choice. But if he hadn't made the choice to save the one person, then the battle could have gone in a completely different direction. And it seems that, things, even though they seem to be going completely wrong, they work out in exactly the way they should. But Gandalf is struggling with this choice. Pippin says, can't you save Faramir? He's basically said, I've told Baragond what's going to happen, and I hope that he'll be able to prevent this evil from happening, but I'm not sure. But can't you go and make sure that he's safe? And Gandalf says, maybe I can, but if I do, then others will die, I fear. Well, I must come, since no other help can reach him, but evil and sorrow will come of this. Even in the heart of our stronghold, the enemy has power to strike us. For his will it is that is at work. So he just scoops up Pippin and starts riding to Faramir's aid. And along the way, he sees Prince Imrahil.
Yeah. Whither now, Mithrandir? So,
Shakespearean.
We have to gather all the strength that we can find. And Gandalf is like, yo, I can't go. You need to take command. So find everybody you can and get out there. I love that we get here another little gesture toward the sun, the light growing in the southern sky as that wind from the sea blows the clouds away.
Oh, yeah, that's a great catch.
But it says, but it brought little hope to them, not knowing what evil lay before them, fearing to come too late. And then they see that Baragond is not there because there's no guard at the citadel. And that's Pippin telling Baragond, you got to do something about this. You're going to have to disobey orders and leave your post. And then Baragond's actions coming up here. His son, I can't remember his son's name.
Beargill.
He's right about his father, about how, because, at one point he says, like, we're going to be okay because my dad is such a awesome,
valiant man.
Yeah. That always makes me, it makes me cry. But
Beargill, you're right, dude. Baragond is such a hero.
His perspective on his dad is, 100% right. And this dude, it's his most heroic moment in his life, probably, following the orders of this little hobbit.
They pass through the gate of the citadel and they come to the closed door with a capital C and a capital D.
Yeah, very menacing.
And the door is wide open, and before it is a man who's slain. It's called the Porter. It says he was slain and his key had been taken. And Gandalf, once again, I mean, this, I know I've said this like the last 6 episodes, but I really feel like this is just the thesis of the whole book. Gandalf says, work of the enemy, such deeds he loves, friend at war with friend, loyalty divided in confusion of hearts.
Gandalf's farewell to Shadowfax
Yeah.
is so. It feels almost out of place. You and I should have ridden to the fields long ago, but other matters delay me. Yet come swiftly if I call.
It's almost like we can't hear Shadowfax's side of the exchange. It's almost like Shadowfax being like, yo,
Yeah, I like that.
Gandalf, what are we doing here, dog? Like, there's war out there. Look, there's open fields. I could be stomping on orc necks right now. And
Instead,
Gandalf's
I'm
like,
up
hey,
here.
hey.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm in this like stone city. Like, I am not supposed to be here. Pippin and Gandalf go through the door and they make their way into this sepulcher, Rathdennen, where the lords of Gondor have been laid to rest, and they hear the ringing of swords. It says, such sounds as had not been heard in the hallowed places since the building of the city. And Gandalf comes around the corner and he's just says, stay, stay,
Stay.
like cut it out. Stay this madness. Because he sees that the servants of Denethor are there with their swords and their torches in their hands, but alone, standing against them on the topmost step, is Baragond. And it says that two of them had already fallen to his sword, staining the hallows with their blood, and the others cursed him, calling him an outlaw and a traitor to his master.
And so they're getting conflicting orders from Gandalf on one side and Denethor on the other.
Yeah.
Denethor is yelling, haste, haste, do as I've bidden, slay me this renegade. Baragond is trying to hold the door shut. And Gandalf, thankfully, Gandalf springs up the steps. And it says that they cover their eyes because he's so bright. His whiteness is so, it's like the daylight coming into the dark place or something.
Yeah, they have to like lift their hands to cover their eyes. And it says that Denethor stepped backward before Gandalf as one amazed.
Well, and that's after Gandalf uses a little magic and
Yeah, that's right. Knocks his sword out of his hand.
yeah, flicks his sword out of his hand. And it's interesting, like Denethor he's so scornful of Gandalf, and he sort of, I think, puts himself on the same level as Gandalf.
Yeah.
He's like, we're the same, and
Yeah. Even though they're not, yeah.
and they're really not. I mean, anybody who knows Gandalf at all knows that he's like the greatest power and one of the greatest powers in the world,
Right, yeah.
And so the fact that he, is able to kind of flick the sword out of Denethor's hand, like Denethor, it maybe kind of finally starts to dawn on him that like who Gandalf is.
It says he lifted up his hand, and in the very stroke, the sword of Denethor flew up and left his grasp and fell behind him in the shadows of the house.
Even after this kind of show of force, his like magical, whatever, prestidigitation, he engages Denethor in dialogue. He's like, "What is this?
Yeah, what are you doing?
What are you doing? This isn't where this. There's a war being fought out here, and you're in the places of the dead. Like, why are you back here?"
Yeah, he says the houses of the dead are no places for the living.
Yeah.
And why do men fight here in the hollows when there is war enough before the gate? Or has our enemy come even to Rathdennen? So he's basically saying like, hey, why are you playing Sauron's role right now?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
why are you doing Sauron's bidding when you should be out there doing what Theoden is doing in this very moment?
And he reminds him there of his responsibility to the city. And then he says, "Where's your son, Faramir? You also have a responsibility to your son, who's not dead." But he says, "Burning, burning, already burning," which even though I've read this, I don't know how many times. I've read this countless times and I know the story. I was like, "Oh, he's already."
Yes, he already killed him.
Yeah. And I was like, well, wait, no, it's just a metaphor. But it's all about this, he sees his own lot and Faramir's lot as sort of being the fate of the West. All shall go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended, ash and smoke blown away in the wind.
Yeah, and Gandalf also similarly fears that he's already done some great evil, and so he just pushes forward and says that Baragond and Pippin follow behind him, and they find that Faramir is still alive, dreaming in a fever, laying upon the table. But wood has been piled all under the table and around it, and he'd been drenched with oil, even the garments of Faramir and the coverlets. But it says, but as yet no fire had been set to the fuel. And then it says, then Gandalf revealed the strength that lay hidden in him, even as the light of his power was hidden under his gray mantle. He leapt up onto the faggots, and raising the sick man, lightly he sprang down again, and bore him towards the door. But as he did so, Faramir moaned and called on his father in his dream. It says that he started as one who's woken up from a trance, and the fire leaves his eyes for a moment, and he says, do not take my son from me. He calls for me.
You know what it reminds me of is those times when we get a little bit of Smeagol peeking out, through the golem.
Yeah. It's even described as a green flame for Gollum sometimes.
Yeah, just those glimmers of moments where there's a little humanity that comes back into his eyes.
Gandalf says, he calls, but you cannot come to him yet, for he must seek healing on the threshold of death, and maybe find it not. Whereas your part is to go out to the battle of your city, where maybe death awaits you. This you know in your heart. So he's saying, like, hey, like, yeah, like, come to him, but not now. Right now, you need to go and fulfill your duty, and he needs to go to a place where he can find healing because he's sick. But Denethor immediately falls back into despair. He says, he will not wake again. Battle is vain. Why should we wish to live longer? Why should we not go to death side by side?
And this is where Gandalf responds and says, authority is not given to you to order the hour of your death, and certainly not of your kin.
Yeah, he says, and only the heathen kings under the domination of the dark power did thus, slaying themselves in pride and despair, murdering their kin to ease their own death. I think it's interesting that even in the midst of Gandalf, I mean, he has literally just pulled Faramir off the funeral pyre. He still makes an appeal to Denethor to do the right thing. He says, come, we are needed. There is much you can yet do. So that's the second time now that he's been like, hey, it's not too late. Like let's get back to the battle. That's where you're really needed. But Denethor laughs at this, and he pulls out the Palantir that at this point has just really been alluded to. And he stands there, and it burns with an inner flame that, casts light upon his face and makes him look even more mad. And he says, pride and despair. Didst thou think the eyes of the White Tower were blind? Nay, I have seen more than thou knowest, great fool. For thy hope is but ignorance. Go then and labor in healing. Go forth and fight. Vanity. For a little space you may triumph on the field for a day, but against the power that now arises, there is no victory. The West has failed. It is time for all to depart who would not be slaves.
Gandalf's responses in this chapter are so simple and to the point and short. So in response, he just says, such counsels will make the enemy's victory certain indeed.
Yeah.
And before Denethor gives this whole monologue, he said, you already said this, but we're needed. There's much we can yet do, or you can yet do. I mean, I think that kind of, right, it makes Denethor look like a madman. He's just ranting. But there's a sort of still surety to Gandalf, especially as Gandalf the White. In his glow up, he becomes even more kind of enigmatic, and his wisdom is borne out not in like great long speeches, but just in like short sentences and little ways of being encouraging. And it's similar here. Like he basically just says, like, if we follow your way of thinking, like, we're definitely going to lose.
Yeah. Like let's hope that we don't follow your advice. But it's interesting in this chapter. I mean, we're coming up on, in a minute, Gandalf is going to look out over the field, and it says, and he looked with the sight that was given him.
Yeah, you could see everything, almost as if it's up close.
Like he is given insight into, what's transpired in the battle while he was away saving Faramir's life. Denethor similarly is given insight through this powerful object, the Palantir, but he comes to the exact wrong conclusion again and again and again. I mean, the thing that breaks his will finally, it says, even now the wind of thy hope cheats thee and wafts up Anduin a fleet with black sails. Like, that's what finally breaks his resolve. What brings him to full despair is seeing these black sails coming, which he assumes are the Corsairs of Umbar.
Yeah.
And so he quits. But it's the irony, of course, is that we know this is Aragorn. And if he had just waited, but with the right information, he comes to the wrong conclusion and despairs. And that's, he never gets to figure out that he was wrong because he
collapses. He just collapses in the face of it.
We already talked about how he has this attitude of, nobody can teach me anything. Like, I already know everything. And that's because he's looking at the Palantir. But he says, like, don't try and fool me anymore, Mithrandir. I know that you have, brought this halfling among my midst, and you've commanded him to keep silent, but I still, because of my deep intelligence, have been able to figure out the names of everybody in your company. And I know that you're bringing up this ranger from the north to supplant me. But I say to thee, I will not be thy tool. I am steward of the house of Anarion, and this is the heir of Isildur. So I will not step down to the dotard chamberlain of an upstart. Even were his claim proved to me, still he comes but from the line of Isildur.
Yeah.
I will not bow to such a one, last of a ragged house, long bereft of lordship and dignity. So this goes all the way back to, the conversation that Frodo has with Faramir back in Ithilien. Faramir says, like, great proofs will need to be presented. From the beginning, I think it's always been the case that were Aragorn to come to the city while Denethor was the steward, or while Boromir was the steward, that his claim to the throne would not be accepted, I don't think.
Yeah. I think Aragorn goes to war against Gondor in that case. I kind of don't think so, but I don't know.
He's very concerned with how he comes to the city and how he presents his claim.
He won't even stay overnight in the city until he's like crowned king. So,
right. Gandalf asks him, what then would you have if your will could have its way? And Denethor says, I would have all things as they were in all the days of my life and the days of my long fathers before me, to be the lord of this city in peace and leave my chair to a son after me, who would be his own master and no wizard's pupil. But if doom denies this to me, then I will have naught, neither life diminished, nor love halved, nor honor abated.
I mean, he just wants things to go back to the way they were, which I think is a pretty common human desire. That's what nostalgia is about. But it's interesting that, the long days of his fathers that he's talking about also represent a long diminishment of Gondor's station in the world and their ability to marshal their own whatever agency in their land. And Gandalf says, kind of calls him back to his responsibility, which is to be the steward. And the whole point of a steward is to steward and then give away. It's literally his vocation is to give up power to a king, not to stay on as the Lord of Gondor.
Do you want to read his response? I think it's a really beautiful.
Gandalf's response?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Gandalf says, to me, it would not seem that a steward who faithfully surrenders his charge is diminished in love or in honor, said Gandalf. And at the least, you shall not rob your son of his choice while his death is still in doubt. It's also, I think, real tragic that here he says, I would rather have a son who's not a wizard's pupil.
Yeah.
Because he's called Faramir that at least once or twice. A wizard's pupil, and but Boromir is his own man, yada yada. But he just doesn't see Faramir for his strengths.
Denethor does not take this advice from Gandalf well, and he draws a knife and strides towards Faramir. And at this, Beregond sets himself between Faramir and Denethor. Beregond is a valiant man trying to prevent the death of his lord. And Denethor whines and says, "So, thou hast already stolen half my son's love. Now thou stealest the hearts of my knights also, so that they rob me wholly of my son at the last. But in this at least thou shalt not defy my will to rule my own end." And he cries out to his servants. He says, "Come hither. Come if you are not all recreant." And two of them run up, and swiftly he takes a torch from one of them, springs back into the house, and before he can be prevented, he leaps up onto the table and sets the pyre aflame.
It's interesting that he breaks his staff. It's kind of a symbolically, giving away his role as steward. But he still clasps the palantir. That's the most important thing in the world to him, is that stone.
Yeah.
And the power it gives him.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, a haunting image. It says that anyone who looked into the palantir in the years following this, unless they had a really strong strength of will in order to turn it to their purposes, only saw two aged hands withering in flame. And at that, Denethor gives a great cry, and afterwards spoke no more, nor was ever again seen by mortal men.
"So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion," said Gandalf. "He also marks this as the end of an age."
Yeah, he says, "And so pass also the days of Gondor that you have known. For good or evil they are ended. Ill deeds have been done here, but let now all enmity that lies between you be put away. For it was contrived by the enemy, and works his will. You have been caught in a net of warring duties that you did not weave. But think, you servants of the Lord, blind in your obedience, that but for the treason of Beregond, Faramir, captain of the White Tower, would now also be burned." Blind in your obedience. I mean, there's always a call in Tolkien to question authority. Earlier, when Gandalf first encounters Denethor, Denethor says, "Since when has the Lord of Gondor been answerable to thee? Or may I not command my own servants?" And Gandalf says, "You may, but others may contest your will when it is turned to madness and evil."
Yeah.
So like even powerful people can be called to account when they give bad counsel. If there's a law that's unjust, people of valor defy those laws.
There's a lot of doors passed through in Lord of the Rings, some kind of liminality or something.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it feels like these conversations happen, around who's allowed to like enter or leave, right? And right away, obviously, you think of Hama, and even the door of Moria, right? There's always places where there's a closed door. And to pass through it, you have to have some kind of knowledge or ability, or you have to contend with a doorkeeper, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when it's Hama, somebody who can think for himself, it's fine. But Beregond has to kill the porter to get in there, and then has to kill a couple guards. And I just feel, yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a spiritually inflected point of crossing thresholds and through liminal spaces. But oftentimes in life, there's somebody who's there in your way, barring the door. And how do you get through it is a good question.
Yeah. And in Beregond's case here, when they get back to the steward's door, it says that Beregond looked with grief at the porter, and he says, "This deed I shall ever rue. But a madness of haste was on me, and he would not listen, but drew his sword against me." And it says, "Then taking the key that he had wrested from the slain man, he closed the door and locked it." It says, "This should now be given to the Lord Faramir, And Gandalf says, Faramir can't take this right now, and the Prince of Dol Amroth is in command in the absence of the Lord Denethor. But since he is not here, I must take this on myself. I bid you keep the key and guard it until the city is set in order again. And as they take Faramir to the houses of healing, it says that Gandalf went to the walls nearby, and there, like a figure carven in white, he stood in the new sun and looked out. And he beheld with the sight that was given to him all that had befallen. And when Éomer rode out from the forefront of his battle and stood beside those who lay upon the field, he sighed, and he cast his cloak about him again and went from the walls. And he addresses the crowd. He says, "My friends, and all you people of this city and of the western lands, things of great sorrow and renown have come to pass. Shall we weep or be glad? Beyond hope, the captain of our foes has been destroyed, and you have heard the echo of his last despair. But he has not gone without woe and bitter loss. And that I might have averted but for the madness of Denethor. So long has the reach of our enemy become. Alas, but now I perceive how his will was able to enter into the very heart of the city."
The chapter just sort of ends with Pippin kind of putting some things together about, the failing wisdom of Denethor.
It's interesting that Gandalf says he was too great to be subdued to the will of the dark power. He saw, nonetheless, only those things which the power permitted him to see. It says, the knowledge which he obtained was doubtless often of service to him. Yet the vision of the great might of Mordor that was shown to him fed the despair of his heart until it overthrew his mind.
It just makes me think so much of like TV, and it's possible to have too much information,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it does not help Denethor to have too much information in this circumstance.
Mm-mm.
And you contrast that to somebody like Baragond, who has, kind of almost no information.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But he can still exercise his judgment and his will in a way that's for the good. But Denethor is so overwhelmed by all this information that he has, even partial as it is, and he can't contend with the kind of full weight of these things that are happening in the world. He would be better off with a more limited view, in a way, just taking responsibility for his city, not for the entire weight of the world. And I think that runs through Tolkien also.
Absolutely.
That you're responsible for the thing in front of you, not responsible for, something that happened 1,000 miles away.
And this is just such a timeless lesson that Tolkien taps into here. I mean, this is written, 60 years before social media. And we've joked several times already on the pod about how Denethor loses his mind because he can't stop looking at his phone.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's true that we are simultaneously more informed and less powerful than we've ever been.
Yeah.
It can lead to despair. I think we've seen that time and again.
Yep, definitely.
Gandalf tells Baragond to report to the chief of the guard and to tell him what has befallen. He says, "It will be his duty, I fear, to withdraw you from the guard. But say to him that if I may give him counsel, you should be sent to the houses of healing, to be guard and servant of your captain, and to be at his side when he awakes, if that shall ever be again. For by you he was saved from the fire."
So we end with Gandalf saying, "I'll return soon." And he and Pippin go to the lower part of the city. But even as they hasten on their way, it starts to rain. And the fires diminish and the smoke rises. We're not out of the woods yet, but I think it would have been a disaster for Faramir to have died at the hands of Denethor. And I think there are times, Gandalf shows us there are times where you, like, as we were just saying, can only respond to the thing in front of you. And I think saving one life sometimes is what we're called to. Thank you for reading along with us this week. Next week, we will read Book 5, Chapter 8 of Return of the King, The Houses of Healing. You can connect with us. Best place to go is waywardwizards.com, and you can find all the links to different places to follow the show. We would always appreciate you rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts. We love to get comments on the show on YouTube. You can follow us on Spotify and all the other places where you find podcasts.
But until next time, remember, you are needed. There is much that you can yet do. I'll see you next week.
Bye.